Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Michael Mercado before he makes his first ever MLB start. He's made an appearance out of the bullpen, but now due to injury, he's forced into a major role for the Phils. Is he ready? We'll talk about it on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. We come to you live on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio, morning sports talk show. You also might know me, the credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years. So I've been covering the team for a couple years now. Thank you so much for checking us out. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube. All that stuff really helps us out. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs are wrapped up in the NBA and NHL, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And you've got a chance to bet on some Phillies baseball tonight if you so choose. They're back in action after an off day. They play the Chicago Cubs up at Wrigley, a little bit of a later game, which is why we have a little bit of a later episode. You got an 8:05 first pitch up there at Wrigley Field in Chicago. Not exactly your typical Wrigley day game, but it is a situation where the Philadelphia Phillies will play in that storied ballpark and they'll look for a win. But they're going to have an interesting time with the pitching matchup because due to Spencer Turnbull's injury and Taijuan Walker's injury, you're left without a true fifth starter. So guess who gets the nod? The least experienced pitcher on the roster. The Phillies are going to start Michael Mercado tonight. Now, Michael Mercado was called up from AAA Lehigh and put in the bullpen. But in Lehigh Valley, he had been a starter and a very successful one for the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs. So what do you need to know about Michael Mercado, and is he ready to take on a Cubs lineup that has been slumping lately offensively, and that's been one of the big drawbacks of the Chicago Cubs season. We'll talk more about that in the second segment because I had a conversation with Boog Sciambi earlier today on the radio. You may know him from Sunday Night Baseball, but you might not know he's the play-by-play announcer for the Cubs. So we'll break down what he had to say to me about what's going on with the Cubs, what he expects from the Phillies, a national perspective on the Phillies ceiling. It was a fun combo. But anyway, back to Michael Mercado, because you probably don't know too much about the kid. And that's okay. So his background is he was going to go to Stanford. He forewent the Stanford opportunity to go to the Rays after getting drafted in 2017. Then he bounced around a little bit. I mean, he had Tommy John surgery early on in his career, as a lot of young pitchers do. And then COVID happened, which made it hard for him. You think it was weird for the major leagues. The minor leagues had such a tough time with COVID. If you were down there, it was very hard to move up or down for a year. It stunted a lot of growth for players. So he's had a heck of a path to the major leagues. And you remember seeing him debut in the game against the Detroit Tigers last week. It was a great moment. He had a perfect inning. He had a strikeout in his first at bat as a major league pitcher. It was great. And then you thought, okay, well, who is this kid? And as a reliever, you're not really too worried about it. You're just like, just give me the results. But once he starts starting, and it could be for a couple weeks, you say, oh, okay, we better find out if this guy is good enough to pitch for the Philadelphia Phillies alongside Zach Wheeler, Ranger Suarez, Aaron Nola, and Christopher Sanchez. So let's start by talking about his numbers from the minor leagues this year. He's not just a guy that, he's a bullpen arm, this, that, and the other thing. He was the Phillies' number 30th ranked prospect. So it's not like he was a highly touted guy. He was just a guy at Lehigh that was throwing the best. He pitched in 14 games for the Iron Pigs so far this year. This is interesting. A 1-1 win-loss record, 47 and a third innings pitched. So he did make starts, but hasn't gotten a lot of decisions, which is wild considering he's got a 1.71 ERA in those 47 and a third innings pitched, 44 strikeouts. So the strikeout ability is there. He's striking out about a batter an inning. The ERA is low as anything. I know it's AAA, but it's low. And I mean, he's got a 1.14 whip, so he's doing pretty well at controlling base runners. Those numbers sound amazing for Michael Mercado. And you love to see that, but his overall minor league stats, he's pitched in 131 games in the minors, 12 and 19 win-loss record, a 4.4 ERA, 387 strikeouts and 354 innings pitched, and a 1.31 whip. So the strikeouts, good. The ability to keep guys off the bases, pretty darn good. He has solid command. Command is going to be one of those things that needs to translate to the top level. He's also going to need to figure out his stuff and how to use it a little bit better than he has at the minor league level. He does have stuff. He's just got to get a better feel for it. So that's part of what the question is. But undeniable, the strikeout ability and command is there. You just got to find a way to fine-tune it. So what does he bring to the table that allows him to have these numbers? He's not going to be a guy that has a 1.71 ERA at the major league level, at least to start. I don't think like his ceiling is that high. I don't honestly know what his ceiling is. He's probably a bullpen pitcher at the major league level when everything's all said and done. But the reason is he's starting is he was the best starter in AAA Lehigh. That's why he was called up, because they thought he was just too good of an arm to leave down there. And now when you get forced into a situation where you need a guy, rather than making another roster move, sending somebody down, maybe dealing with waivers, dealing with removing an option from somebody, you just say, okay, he started like 2 weeks ago. He's probably still stretched out. You're good to go. And I'd say he's still stretched out. If I had to guess what you're expecting from Michael Mercado tonight, if you get 5 innings out of him, you're ecstatic. If you get 4, okay. That's the expectation I'd imagine for this kid to go out there. Maybe even a quicker hook because you had an off day and the bullpen's been so talented. But again, the Cubs don't really hit all that well. So it should be a solid time to get your feet wet, I guess. Imagine making your major league debut last week against the Tigers, and then the next thing they say is, so that's like a low pressure spot. It was like an 8-1 game too. And the next thing you know, you're starting a game at Wrigley for the team who's at the top of the National League. Man, his heart's going to be pounded out of his chest tonight. But let's just really quick, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the pitch arsenal. So you know like how this guy gets batters out, what he uses. He throws 3 pitches consistently: a 4-seam fastball, a cutter, and a curveball. Now, the 4-seam fastball can reach up to 97, 98 miles an hour. In shorter outings, people believe that maybe he could touch 99, but he's really going to be sitting around probably 95 to 96 tonight, especially if the Philadelphia Phillies want to get 5 innings out of him. So that's a plus pitch. He can spot it. He can elevate it. He also throws that cutter just to kind of vary up the looks on the fastball. And the curveball is his out pitch. If he's going to get somebody, it's going to be with that heavy breaking curveball he throws over the top. He's got pretty good tunneling on his release of his pitches, so that's why he can be deceptive. And he's a tall kid. He's up there. What is he, like 6'5", 6'6"? They were having a debate about it on the broadcast when he pitched in Detroit. Tom McCarthy and I forget if it was John Kruk that was on it, but they're saying like they met him and talked to him, and he's listed as 6'4", and he seemed significantly taller than that. So the extension is good. When you have long length and long arms and a long stride, the ball that you throw at 95 miles an hour, it's got an extra like 2 feet from the release point from how far out you're throwing it. So it plays, 2-3 miles an hour faster. 95 feels like 97, 98. 97 feels like 99, 100. And that's just another plus. So the guy can throw hard. The guy can spot up. He's got good stuff. He's just green. Do people still say green? That feels like such like a 1950s word. He's a little green. He's a little inexperienced is what I mean to say. So we'll get to see what is going to happen in tonight's matchup between the Phillies and the Cubs with Mercado on the mound. Now he's facing a guy, Hayden Wesneski. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways I could potentially pronounce his last name. It's Wisniewski. But the reason that I'm saying the name a bunch of different ways is, well, he's got 45 innings pitched in the regular season. He's got 167 innings pitched in his career. He's just not a guy that has a lot of experience at the major league level. Only started 4 games so far this year. He's got a 3.6 ERA, 44 strikeouts, a 1.16 whip. Just not a lot of experience on the mound for him. So you get a righty with not a lot of experience against this lineup. You should be able to take advantage. Funny enough, the Philadelphia Phillies actually have a 53.6% chance to win tonight's game. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. We'll get into a little bit of an overview of the teams in the final segment of today's podcast. But the Phils are plus 105. They're underdogs in tonight's game, probably because of Michael Mercado and not knowing what he brings. But I think the kid's got a shot. I think he's solid. And I think he's got a really darn good team behind him. So we'll see if he goes out and makes magic happen. And this game is going to go a long way to determine how you feel about the fifth starter position until the All-Star break. If he goes out and battles, you say, oh, okay, we may be fine. If he doesn't go out and battle, well, the next time this spot comes up in the rotation is against the Atlanta Braves. That's going to be a lot tougher than against the Chicago Cubs. So you may have to find something else you want to do there. That could become a bullpen game, which could tax your bullpen right before the series with the Atlanta Braves. So yes, if you're asking me, the Philadelphia Phillies could really use Michael Mercado to have a good start tonight in order to make sure that they're in good positioning for the big series you have coming up later in the week and next week. So coming up next, we're going to get into that conversation I was telling you about. I talked to Boog Sciambi. If you know baseball announcers, if you know baseball personalities, great baseball minds, you know Boog. John Sciambi is the play-by-play announcer for the Cubs. He's on Sunday Night Baseball. He's been doing this for a long time, and he talked with us on the morning show over at 97.5 The Fanatic. I'll share some of the tidbits that I picked up from him as we continue today's episode. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel because I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. I can bet futures. I can bet baseball. I can bet the Euros are going on right now. Copa America, even though Team USA got knocked out last night by Uruguay. There's a lot of stuff, right? And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, not just new customers. No, all customers with a boost, not a boat, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Check out more info in the description of this episode. So this morning, I got the opportunity to talk with, you already heard me say his name a couple of times, with Boog Sciambi. And he's been around baseball for a long time. He grew up a Philadelphia Phillies fan, actually. I did not know that until I got the chance to talk to him. And I've seen a lot of his work. I've never had the chance to interact with him. Fun guy. And very interesting thoughts on this upcoming series. I asked him multiple things. I asked him about the Cubs. I asked him about the Phillies ceiling. And he had some very interesting answers to all of that. So what he said, first and foremost, the first question I asked him was, the Cubs are currently in last place in the National League Central as the Phillies prepare to start this series with them. But of all the last place teams in baseball, all 6 teams that are in final spots in their division, the Cubs have the most wins. They have 39 wins. So are they more dangerous than their last place standing would indicate? And what is more dangerous about them? And he talked about the Cubs just being slightly unlucky at this point, injury-wise, production-wise. He sees them as like an 84, 85 win team when everything's all said and done. And right now they're playing on the pace of like a 77 win team. So that's not ideal for them. That's below 500 when they finish. But basically, this is about a 500 baseball team, which is pretty much, I don't know, what, 75% of the teams in baseball this year just feel like 500 baseball teams. It's kind of wild how many teams are hanging right around 500. This is a great year for the Philadelphia Phillies to be as good as they are, because if you were fighting for the wild card in this season, it would be a lot more stressful than it was the past couple years. There are a lot of teams in contention for that. The Cubs are certainly one of them in the National League. What is making them still dangerous, even though they're in last place in the NL Central? Well, their pitching has been outstanding. They have had some really, really great arms. Shota Imanaga has been amazing for them. You're going to see him in Game 2 of this series. Tyone has been really good. You're going to see him, I believe, in Game 3 of this series. They've had guys be really, really solid for them. But offensively, they've had a couple injuries to withstand. They haven't really put together a strong offensive production. And I mean, the numbers for the Chicago Cubs seem to equal out with what Boog was saying. The leader for home runs is Chris Morel. He's only got 15 on the year to Bryce Harper's 20. Cody Bellinger's leading the team in average, 267. I mean, Bryce Harper's got 303 batting average for the Phillies. And Morel is leading the Cubs in RBIs, 45. Alec Bohm's got 68. You just look at the stats for the Cubs offensively, and you recognize some of the names: Nico Horner, Morel, Cody Bellinger, Ian Happ, Dansby Swanson. But then you look at the average and you say, okay, Morel's batting 198, Horner 248, Cody Bellinger 267. They expected him to be much better this year after last year's stellar season. Happ 229, Dansby Swanson batting 217. I mean, it's just, you haven't really gotten production out of the guys that you'd expect to, and that's why this team is struggling. The offense seems like it should be better. It isn't, and they're paying the price, even though the pitching has been really, really good. And while the pitching has been good, they haven't had a lot of guys throwing deep into games, so the bullpen has been taxed, and taxed early for the Chicago Cubs this season. They're not at their best, and that's all kind of the perfect storm. You don't score enough. Your pitching is good, but they don't go deep enough into the games, you're starting pitching, so then the bullpen gets used up early. And by the time you hit July, which is where we're at, the Phils will be playing their first game of July tonight, you're kind of starting to wear down a little bit already, and you haven't even hit the All-Star break. So that's the perfect storm that's led to the Cubs being in last place in the NL Central, but he did bring up the starting pitching as a reason why they're still dangerous, and that's something that the Phillies can match up with them well on. The big issue is tonight, luckily, you're not facing one of their best pitchers. Wesneski is not a guy that you should be too worried about for the Phillies facing. That was the answer, basically, from Boog. Now, I also asked him a follow-up on the Philadelphia Phillies. I said, okay, looking at this team, let's say we wake up in October. It's the end of October. The World Series has just ended, and the Philadelphia Phillies are world champions. Just take a second. Close your eyes. Imagine that for me. Doesn't it feel good? But I asked basically what would be the reason that the Philadelphia Phillies were carried there. Like, what dominated the reasoning for them reaching that point? And it took him a second to answer, because I could tell he was racking his brain. You could immediately tell what the issue was. It wasn't, I don't know a reason that they're going to be there. It was, I can't really pick a reason. And essentially that's what he communicated in his answer, was that there could be a lot of reasons why the Philadelphia Phillies are there. He started by talking about the pedigree of the team, the amount of guys that they have that have just been there before: Harper, Realmuto, Schwarber, Castellanos, Turner, guys that have been around the block, that have played at the high level for a long time, that are top level players, all of that stuff. He's like, your guys are guys. And Bryce Harper is the most guy of them all. And I know a couple of those guys are injured right now, but those heavy hitters in the Philadelphia Phillies lineup are absolutely talented enough to take this team where they need to go. But then he also talked about the starting pitching and says, well, I mean, you got Wheeler, you got Nola, you got Suarez, you got Sanchez, you've got so many great arms in this rotation and in this bullpen. They shut other teams down. That's absolutely a reason why you could be there. And the bullpen has been outstanding. And he also went on to talk about Rob Thompson. He talks about how Rob Thompson is the perfect manager for when things go wrong. You can't tell. He said that that was the mark of a good manager to him. And he's been around baseball a long time, talked to a lot of great managers, and said, when you walk in a manager's office and the team isn't playing well, can you tell? And he said with Rob Thompson, you can't. You have no idea. And that's because he's just the same guy every single day. And that's what we've heard from everybody about Rob Thompson. But he lists all of these things down as reasons why the Philadelphia Phillies could be there at the end of the day. And I basically followed up and asked him, and I was like, so you're basically saying everything? He's like, yeah, I guess I kind of am. And that should make you feel really good. From a national perspective, when great baseball minds look at this team and they see them coming to town to play their team, or they get them for the national spotlight, or they just discuss them on sports talk radio when they call into Philadelphia, the overwhelming thought from multiple people I've talked to, Jason Stark, Buster Olney, Boog Sciambi now, guys like that, Tim Kirkjian, is just, This team is stacked top to bottom. They're still really good. They're in a stretch right now where they're not as healthy as they're going to be, hopefully, once you reach the postseason. And they are a problem. They're a team you should worry about. And I did say I still keep an eye on the Dodgers, but the Philadelphia Phillies are a special team this year, and they have a lot of talent top to bottom. There could be a billion reasons why this team ends up being the team that stands at the top of the mountain when everything's all said and done. So if you want to go to 975thefanatic.com and listen a little bit after this episode to our interview with Boog Sciambi, you can do that, and you can hear those answers a little bit deeper detail for yourself. But I want to share some of that with you ahead of the matchup with the Cubs. And he did say he would call back in if the Cubs sweep. I don't think that's a realistic possibility. Even though I respect Boog's opinion, I don't think we're going to be getting that phone call from him on Friday when this series is done. But we'll see. We're diving deeper into that coming up. As we wrap up today's episode, we'll discuss the expectations for the Cubs series, why that sweep that Boog was asking for, it ain't going to happen. I felt very comfortable in telling him that. And the sweep that the Phillies are looking for, that probably isn't happening either. We'll discuss as we wrap up today's episode. First, though, I want to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. That's right. PrizePicks is awesome. They're America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. They've got over 5 million active users, and you've got to check it out because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's not like the other apps where you play against other, like the numbers or anything like that. Play against other players. You play against the numbers. You don't have to beat other people in a leaderboard. You just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stats, and you end up with your winnings if you nail it. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that. It takes like 60 seconds to put together a PrizePicks lineup. So like for tonight, let's say you were looking at, I don't know, Alec Bohm, righty on righty. Maybe he hasn't been hitting all that well. He hasn't. So maybe you're looking at that and you say, I think he's going to strike out twice. Take his more than in strikeouts. Nick Castellanos, Trey Turner, those guys have been hot. Maybe you want to look at them and say, okay, I think I'm going to take more than for both of their hits. And Michael Mercado's on the mound for the Phillies. Do you think he's going to strike out more? He had good strikeout numbers in the minors, so maybe that's a place where you take like a better value pick. You can do all of this on PrizePicks, and you know what else you can do? You download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB. You get a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. You just pick more or pick less with PrizePicks. It's absolutely that easy to use. And I also want to tell you about our friends over at Tax Network USA. Here on Locked On Phillies, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news as quickly as possible for your team. Whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs, it's year-round. And you know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. You got a situation that you need to take care of with the IRS, well, they can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, even seize your property. So don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat on your behalf. They've got over 14 years of experience, an A-plus rating by the Better Business Bureau, and they've also saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. So whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or maybe you had that big win that finally hit that parlay this season, need help correctly filing that? Well, whatever the case is, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/locked on. Again, that's tnusa.com/locked on. And be sure to mention Locked On, or Locked On Phillies at checkout. You'll receive a $250 discount off of their service. So no reason not to do it. If you're having trouble with your taxes, go ahead and check out Tax Network USA. Okay, let's talk expectations for this series. I mean, there's a lot to break down, and we already have in this matchup between the Phillies and the Cubs. But when I look at tonight's game, it's kind of like a coin flip, right? You look at it and you say you got probably the better team offensively, even with injuries, just because the Cubs have been so rough offensively. You got 2 pitchers you don't have a lot of data on in Mercado and Wesneski. I don't know. Coin flip, depending on what you get from Mercado and just kind of what day you get. It's very weird to see 2 pitchers on the mound that I haven't seen much of at the major league level and don't know too much about. The money line goes the Cubs' way tonight. The ESPN analytics goes the Phillies' way, 53.6% chance to win. Who knows? So game 1 is a toss-up. Let's look at games 2 and 3 just real quickly, and then we'll develop an expectation for the series. Game 2, you got Zach Wheeler facing off against Shota Imanaga. And if you haven't been familiar with Imanaga this year, Cubs fans have been touting him as a Cy Young candidate for good reason. 7.2 win-loss record. ERA is 3.07. It's been much lower than that. He's just kind of been in a rough stretch lately, but a 1.11 whip in 85 innings pitched. He's got 84 strikeouts. He's allowed 10 home runs, so you can hurt him with a long ball, but he's got 14 walks. For comparison, Zach Wheeler, and 20 more innings pitched, but he's got 31 walks. Imanaga's just very, very well in control of his pitches. A lefty, crafty lefty that somewhat reminds you of Ranger Suarez, I guess, in the way he approaches pitching. He's not going to blow anything by you. We'll talk more about this in tomorrow's episode and give you the full breakdown of why he's been so good. But Wheeler in that matchup, he's the better pitcher, especially with a offense in Chicago that can't really figure out many guys right now. The final matchup of the series is Christopher Sanchez versus Jameson Taillon. And Taillon's been really good this year at 3.03 ERA. Like I said, the strength of this Cubs roster has been their pitching staff. You still have the pitching advantage in that one. You have the matchup advantage in that one. So it looks like the Phillies, according to the ESPN analytics, are favored to win every game in this series. I think you should win this series. I think you should win 2 games out of 3, especially because you have Wheeler throwing and Sanchez throwing in back-to-back games, and Mercado is facing off against a guy that doesn't have a lot of major league experience. So it feels like more of an even playing field than if he was facing Imanaga or something like that. So I don't know. Things are looking to be in the Phillies' favor, but the Marlins series has me a little spooked. I'm definitely not predicting a sweep. I never do that, and I'm certainly not in this series against the Cubs. I do think the Phillies play solidly at Wrigley. I don't really think they struggle too much with the Cubs, especially this version of the Cubs. I'm trying to think. In 2022, I remember they were the first series out of the All-Star break, and they went to Chicago and got swept. And that was like a what in the world is wrong with you type of moment. But I'm not scared of Chicago the way I would be of like San Francisco, where the Phillies always seem to struggle out there. Or every once in a while in Colorado, they run into some issues. Like, no, I don't have any problem with the Phillies being in Chicago in Wrigley. I think they handle their business. I think they win 2 out of 3. I think the reason they win 2 out of 3 is the offense steps up more so than it did in that series against the Miami Marlins. I think there were a couple games where the offense just didn't have enough with runners in scoring position, and they've been a team that's been really good with runners in scoring position this year. The Philadelphia Phillies have one of the best in baseball. They're like top 5, top 6, and batting average, slugging, on-base percentage with runners in scoring position. Like, they take care of business in the big spots. If they just had a rough series, well, their averages would say the next series is probably going to be a situation where they get back to where they're normally at, which is more productive with runners in scoring position. So I don't know. Hopefully that evens itself out. The Phillies have some clutch hits, but it could also be that you lose Bryce Harper, you lose Kyle Schwarber. You just don't have as much pop and power and great hitting with those runners in scoring position. It's guys instead like, I don't know, Christian Pache or David Dahl or Whit Merrifield or Stubbs or Marchand that are at the plate when those opportunities come around. So I guess it's where you get the opportunities. Also, the long ball can be weird at Wrigley. With the wind, you can get into a situation where there can be a wind tunnel depending on the night, and it just makes it significantly tougher to pitch. Or you can have a day where the wind's blowing in and you just can't hit anything out. You got to hit it basically 450 feet to get it to go 390. We'll see. Weird stadium, fun stadium. It's going to be a fun series. And as much as the Cubs aren't like top of the top, and it's not going to be one of these like measuring stick series, it's still very cool to watch the Phillies play at Wrigley. I'll never get tired of seeing that stadium on TV. Maybe I'll see it in person one day. Who knows? But that's my thoughts. Win 2 out of 3. That's the expectations for the series. You lose the series, I'm disappointed, even without Harper, Schwarber, and Realmuto. That's all for today's episode. And tomorrow's episode, we'll recap what happens in tonight's matchup out there in the Windy City. We'll also preview game number 2 of the series with the Chicago Cubs. Will the Phils be already going for the series win? It's certainly possible. And how did Michael Mercado do in his debut tonight? We'll break down that as well. So good luck to the kid. Good luck to the Phillies. And thank you to you for checking us out here on Locked On Phillies. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing wherever you consume your podcast. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the YouTube. It's the best way to say thank you for the content and say you like it. Get you notifications when new episodes are posted. It costs you no money to subscribe or anything like that. It takes like 2 seconds to do. So I would really appreciate it. It seriously helps me out so much. All right, that's all for today's episode. I'll talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.